Before we get started, I just want to talk about there's two great events here in New Hampshire every year. One is the Liberty Forum. I shouldn't say every year. And the other is Pork Fest. And people always say, what is Liberty Forum compared to Pork Fest? I said, Liberty Forum's in a hotel and Pork Fest is camping. Drunk. With a lot of people. So last year was one of the biggest. We had, I think, over 1,200 people at Pork Fest. It was absolutely crazy. And this year, Sharon Osborne, she's like, oh, thanks for calling me out. And Jason Osborne are running it. And there is a sign-up sheet. You can sign up for Pork Fest right now. It's June 18th through the 26th, if I remember correctly. I'll be there till the 26th. So everyone else is leaving the 24th, I guess. So it's a great time. It's a great place for you to kind of just, it's just hanging out at a campsite is what I always call it, right? So it's a great time. Come on up. I think this is like the 9th or 10th one we've done. It's, come to Pork Fest. So one thing you might have noticed about all of our great sponsors is we always talk about a lot of precious metals, right? Because we all know our dollar's worthless. And as our dollar keeps declining more and more, I think it's actually waking up people more and more. And I always think of it as people are actually voting with their dollars if you think about it, right? They're leaving the dollar, they're moving to other either currencies, they're moving into precious metals, maybe they're moving into commodities. And it's kind of a vote with your dollar. And one of the things that I think is great that Peter Schiff talks about a lot is that, you can make money in these markets because it's predictable what the status and what the governments are going to do is they're going to deflate our currency or inflate our currency, and they're going to make these changes that it's going to allow us to make more money. And the other thing, the converse part is how we vote, what we do affects prices and that. And one of the things about the Free State Project is truly voting with your feet, right? It's people who says, I'm sick of wherever you come from, and I'm going to move to New Hampshire to make a difference, because that's what it's all about, right? And we are truly making a difference. Someone asked me how many state reps are here, and I go, I don't know, like 8 or 9. And they go, they're all Free Staters? I go, no, there's like 12 Free Staters, but a bunch of that whole table over there, they're all native New Hampshire people. And some of them are more libertarian than the Free Stater representatives. Thank you, Mike Ball. So with that notion of voting with your feet, I think you're in for a real treat tonight, because earlier today you heard Peter talk about money and precious metals in the market, and I think he has a really great introspect about how people are going to vote with their feet and what that holds for the future of the United States and our economy. So please welcome Peter Schiff.
So let me just see a quick show of hands. How many people who are in this room were not in the room a couple of hours ago when I spoke? All right, well, how many people were in the other room? About half. All right. Well, I don't want to cover the same material I just covered, but there's some good stuff. But what I do want to do is I want to talk a little bit about this topic. And I know that there were a lot of unanswered questions when I spoke earlier, so I'll try to save a lot of time for questions and for the people that had questions that I wasn't able to get to. If you're in this room now, I'll just lead the topic along the lines of the questions that you have. But anyway, this discussion is about voting with your feet. And I almost voted with my feet and moved to New Hampshire years ago. I know. I regret it because I moved to Connecticut and they've already raised my taxes twice since I moved there. And, a lot of people come to New Hampshire because they want to get out of a state income tax or a sales tax, and they want to be freer. But they don't get away from the federal government. And so what happens if people really vote with their feet and don't just leave a state to go to New Hampshire that's somewhat less oppressive than the state that they left, but they decide to actually leave the country completely? Now, I was joking. I was having lunch with a prospective gubernatorial candidate here in your state, and we were talking about the prospect of secession, which would be very interesting, because if this was a country, I would definitely move here. Because if New Hampshire was its own country, it'd be like the Liechtenstein, right, of the United States, or the Monaco, right? Because it'll be a little enclave of capitalism in a sea of socialism, and everybody would prosper, and you'd get out from under the debt. You wouldn't, because if you leave the country, the debt stays with the United States. Now you can even say, look, we'll take our share of the debt if you let us go peacefully, and then just default. I mean, what are they gonna? What are they gonna do? So, but the question is, will New Hampshire have the guts to do something like that? Because the last time a few states tried to secede, it didn't go very well. And, we got a lot more sophisticated weapons now, so I don't know how it would work this time around.
Don't play us first.
Yeah. But apart from that, right, what happens if people leave? And, all four of my grandparents were immigrants. So I'm a second generation born in America. And why did my parents come here? I mean, my grandparents, why did they come here? They came here because they were looking for freedom. When they came here, there was no income tax. There was no Social Security tax. There were pretty much no taxes to speak of. There were some tariffs, but I mean, who cared about those? I mean, it was no big deal. So they were free. I mean, my grandparents came here, they didn't even speak English. And there was no welfare workers. When they showed up on Ellis Island, there was nobody there to meet them. There was no welfare. There was no food stamps. If they didn't have a job, they didn't eat. Yet they managed to succeed. And why did they leave where they were? Because they didn't have the freedom and the opportunity that we had here. See, immigrants weren't a problem. See, we had a lot more immigrants come into this country 100 years ago than we do now. They were flooding in. But it was great. There was no, when I ran for the U.S. Senate, that was always a big hot button issue. Every time I spoke, I always was getting questions about the immigrants. And it's still a big issue today in the presidential debates. I'll just let you guys in on this because it's probably not going to happen, but I might as well tell you. But I got a call today from a producer of Fox. Fox is having a debate a week from tomorrow. They just put it together, a presidential debate. And there's going to be 3 panelists that were going to ask the questions of the candidates. And they called me up and asked me if I would be one of the panelists. But I had to tell the producer that I was a Ron Paul supporter, and I wasn't sure how well that would go over with the other participants. And so he's going to go run it by him and see if So suffice to say, I doubt they're going to want me to ask them questions. But I would love to ask some questions to Romney, Gingrich, and Santorum. I already know the questions I ask. But anyway, this immigration is a big deal. And I never liked the immigration topic because I always thought it was a scapegoat. People trying to blame the immigrants for our problems. And we had a lot more immigrants, as I said, 100 years ago, and it wasn't a problem. It was great. The difference is the immigrants that came here when my grandparents came for opportunity. There are people coming for a handout. And that's the problem. It's not the immigrants. It's the social welfare state that is making the problem a problem. But the reality is, a lot of the immigrants that are coming here are working. I had someone on my radio show just yesterday, and if you don't know, I have a radio show called The Peter Schiff Show. And I have this show every 2 hours a day at schiffradio.com, so tune in. It's free, and if you can listen live or you can listen to it delayed. But anyway, she went undercover working in California, picking fruit. And I asked her, I said, well, were there any other Americans out, picking fruit with you? She said, no, I was the only one. Because everybody else was Mexican. And the only reason she took the job was because it was part of her research for her book. I asked her, did they think it was odd that an American was actually taking his job? And this was in California at a time when the unemployment rate was over 10%. Yet no one in America would actually go and even interview for a job. Why would they bother when they can get unemployment benefits? Why pick fruit in the hot sun when you can collect unemployment benefits in the shade? But she went out there just for research, looking for work. So a lot of the immigrants that are coming here are actually a net benefit. I mean, probably if you can push a button and make all the immigrants disappear, illegal and legal, we'd be in big trouble. People talk about immigrants taking our jobs. There are a lot of people that wouldn't have jobs if it wasn't for illegal immigrants. A lot of people in California, a lot of mothers wouldn't be able to work if they had to pay for childcare at the rates that the Americans would charge. And in fact, there are a lot of companies that if they didn't have the illegals, they would have to shut down. And so a lot of the legals who have decent jobs would lose them because we'd end up importing the products instead without that labor. So people don't understand the contribution that some of the immigrants are making. Not that others are not a drain. But the problem is that some of them are coming here for a handout and not opportunity, like my grandparents. But we are not the country that my grandparents came to. I mean, not even close. Many countries around the world are freer than America. We have high taxes. There are many countries that have lower taxes than we do. And we have a lot of government, and we have a huge deficit, which means the likely path of taxes in the future is up. I mean, we have a lot of debt. And if we don't default on it or inflate it away, someone's going to have to pay it. And that's going to mean higher taxes, particularly for younger people. Because the younger people in their 20s, 30s, they're the ones that are left holding the bag for the Social Security Ponzi scheme. You've got generations of Americans who are expecting you to support them. In addition, you've got to pay interest on the debt. You got to pay for the national defense. It's not going to leave much left over, right, for people to spend on themselves. Plus, a lot of young Americans are entering the workforce with mortgages, with no houses. They have student loans, $50,000, $100,000. I had a young lady on my show, had a 4-year degree in sociology and $190,000 in student loans to get a sociology degree. Of course, she can't even get a job with that degree, but she's got these loans. So you've got a lot of generations of Americans who are stuck with loans that they can never repay. There's not a lot of good jobs out there, and if they get a job, a good chunk of their money is going to go to the government, and a bigger chunk is going to go to the government in the future. And of course, we're not really attracting anymore as many of the types of immigrants like my grandparents, because we don't have that comparative advantage in freedom. We have less freedom, we have higher taxes than a lot of other countries. And at minimum, we're about the same. I mean, we're not much different than Europe. But at one point, we had such a massive lead, it wasn't even close how much freer people were. And that's why America became so wealthy. It wasn't an accident that we became wealthy. We became wealthy for a reason. We embraced freedom and liberty and capitalism like no other country in the history of the world. And that was responsible for our wealth and for our success. Unfortunately, we abandoned those principles in the 20th century, and we're suffering for it now. I mentioned at my talk earlier, and it surprises a lot of people, so I like this statistic, especially when I heard all the Occupy Wall Street people trying to claim that, the 1%, the rich, they owe their wealth because of society, because of government, because of all the things government does and the taxes that everybody else pays. That's the only reason that people are rich, and so they should be more than happy to give a little back, as if they're not paying enough in taxes already. But during the 19th century, before we had all this government, right? I look back at the 30 wealthiest Americans, self-made. These are not the people that inherited their money, but started from scratch and made their wealth. If you adjusted for inflation, of the 30 wealthiest Americans in history, including all the ones that are alive today, all the dot-com millionaire, billionaire, all the guys around today, of the 30 wealthiest Americans, only three were born after the Civil War. That's it, 3. And of those 3, only 1 was born after the Second World War. So, I mean, the country is going downhill, and these people, and many of them didn't even go to college. Most of the people who were the wealthiest Americans, they didn't go to college. Some of them didn't even go to high school. Yet they achieved wealth, you know, that no one today can compare to the wealth that some of these people amassed. And they did it by sharing their success with an entire nation. They created products. They created the Industrial Revolution. They transformed society. We were a bunch of farmers, you know, and we became an industrial society. People were living in cities. Because of the wealth that these men achieved in a free market, not only did they create all these products, but they created jobs. So many jobs that tens of millions of immigrants were coming in and nobody was unemployed. And all that was done with freedom, with sound money, with gold standard, with deflation, all the things that the government says we don't want. That's what we had. And that's why we became successful. But today, we don't have any of those advantages. In fact, we have a lot of disadvantages. And I think that we have a real threat that if we stay on the course that we're on, that the next major wave of immigration is not going to be coming in, but emigration going out. In fact, another thing that happened when I was running for Senate, and again, they still talk about this now, today, is everybody would say, what about a wall? Let's build a wall on the southern border to keep the Mexicans out. And I always had the same answer why I was opposed to